As we speak, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is on a nationwide tour of the U.S. industrial base. Stops so far have included a shipyard in Newport News, Virginia, Rocket Lab in Long Beach, California, as well as Lockheed Martin's F-35 plant and SpaceX's Starbase in Fort Worth and Brownsville, Texas.
And on this tour, we'll be traveling from the shipyards of the coast to the factories of the heartland to see the work being done by the military and our partners in American manufacturing.
The tour is a result of a broader effort by the Trump administration to reform the acquisition process and supply the U.S. military for potential future conflicts. In November, Secretary Hegseth gave a speech announcing the department's acquisition strategy and gave a preview of the department's efforts to revitalize the defense industrial base, or, as he calls it, the arsenal of freedom. What does this tour mean for the U.S. defense industry, U.S. technological innovation, deterrence, and warfighting capabilities? What does it signal for the development of new space systems, missiles, and munitions? I'm Heather Williams, Director of the CSIS Project on Nuclear Issues. I'm joined by Tom Carrico, Director of the CSIS Missile Defense Project, and Carrie Bingen, Director of the Aerospace Security Project, to answer these questions. Welcome back to the HTK series, devoted to talking about strategic forces issues of the day. HTK stands for Heather, Tom, and Carrie, but for the defense wonks out there, it also stands for Hit to Kill. We will take audience questions, so please submit those online via the event page, and we also might sneak in some discussion questions about Greenland and what it means for Golden Dome. But to get started on defense acquisition reform, Tom, let's start with you. To start really broad, can we zoom out and can you just say a little bit about what is acquisition reform for anyone who does not work deep in the weeds on this like you both do, but then also zoom in a little bit to say, why does acquisition reform have to be done now, what's been being done, and maybe say a bit about the case of munitions and acquisition reform just to get us started.
Yeah, well, look, defense acquisition is how the Pentagon buys stuff, hardware and software as well. And, interestingly, one of the kind of foundational systems, really, the JCIDs, that's been in place forever. And, to paraphrase Marie Kondo, it has not brought a lot of joy to folks either in government.
Can you quickly spell out what JCID stands for?
Joint Cap. Oh, you caught
Sorry.
me. Yeah.
Joint Capability, Integration, Defense.
Yeah, system or something like that. You caught me.
Sorry.
But there's actually been a couple things. So Secretary Hegseth said we're going to cancel JCIDs, but he also put out a memo on kind of improving foreign military sales. So that's sort of another piece of it. And then there's another thing going on here that I think really the Deputy Secretary Steve Feinberg is engaging in another kind of, I would say, experiment in defense acquisition, and that's with the DRPMs, the Direct Reporting Program Managers. And so far we've had, of course, General Michael Gutlein, confirmed in July of last year as the Golden Dome person. We also have General Dale White, who has some very interesting Air Force programs, and then there is a third person who's been nominated for submarines in particular. So these are really some of the biggest giant, to some extent, cross-service with Golden Dome, but also service-specific for the Navy and the Air Force.
Yeah, so I would just build on that, Tom. I think the acquisition reform initiatives and the energy right now in the department, it is such a bright spot for them right now, and they have an opportunity here to make some real, lasting, institutional, impactful changes. What's interesting, though, is everything that was announced, largely everything that was announced November 7th by Secretary Hegseth, focus on speed, volume, flexibility, focus on outcomes and empowering program managers to make trade-offs across cost, schedule, performance, pushing authorities down to a lower level, closer to the actual acquirer as opposed to keeping it up high, pushing them down closer to the users. A lot of this is not new. And we've all lived through various instantiations of acquisition reform. 2017 and 16, I was on House Armed Services Committee working for Mac Thornberry. He, Adam Smith, working with John McCain, pushed through some major acquisition reforms then, pushing authorities down on the services. You had the Section 809 panel, wartime contracting panel. So a lot of efforts, similar kind of messaging. Here's what I think is different now is that there's strong alignment across Department of War, White House, and Congress, bipartisan and bicameral. You had the Speed and Forged Acts introduced by the House and the Senate, respectively. And oh, by the way, this was all announced in year one of an administration. So you now have 3 more years to focus on implementation, which is going to be the big thing I think that matters here that will allow for lasting change. The other thing I would just briefly mention is in all of those previous acquisition reform efforts, it's always been pushed down. So the lead person driving it was the undersecretary or the service secretary or assistant secretary. The fact that you have the Secretary of War himself going out to all of these companies, I've been told it's Deputy Secretary of War Feinberg really pushing the department and the processes as well. Those 2 gentlemen focused on this is really unprecedented since probably like Harold Brown, Bill Perry days of the second offset in the late 70s. So there's a lot that can be done here.
Yeah, I'll just say, Carrie, to your constant refrain about implementation, I think the tour's great. I think it's a good idea. I'll tell you, I've talked to people that have been at these locations, for instance, Starbase in Texas, and it sounds like a pretty good show. It's kind of getting people excited about, the workers on the line are pretty excited about this stuff. But Carrie, to your implementation point, I have heard folks in industry, for instance, make the observation that notwithstanding these memos, you still have the Pentagon talking in terms of milestone B, milestone C, and these legacy things. So it really kind of comes to, okay, JSIDS is dead, but what is going to replace it? So it sounds like there's still some work to be done to figure that out. And then to answer the second half of your question, Heather, this is the focus of mine, that there's a big attention on munitions. There's been just recently an announcement, a framework agreement, I will say, not a contract, from the department about more than tripling the PAC-3 MSE production. And this is, we have a graphic here, this is the first of several such announcements. I'm expecting it for a handful of other both missile defense and then offensive strike munitions. And so I'll say that there's a couple things happening here. One, especially DepSec Feinberg has been pushing for another experiment in defense acquisition, and that is, instead of the department paying for all the facilities and all that kind of stuff, he's really putting the onus on industry. And this is a big bill to swallow. When I say a big bill, I mean double-digit billions for particular companies to go out and build lots of facilities and lots of lines and hire people and train the workforce to be able to go from a small number of THAADs per year to triple-digit THAADs per year. And so this announcement, the first announcement for PAC-3s, it's gone from about 650 rounds for PAC-3s to 2,000 per year. It sounds really good, and this is the right thing to do. The Biden administration has began to ramp up. This is continuing that ramp, but going a lot further. But while there's a lot of cheering going on, and that's good, and we want to make sure that this gets instantiated, I will say that the winter of our munitions discontent is not quite glorious summer. And the reason is, you can announce, you can have a press release, you can have a framework, but until you get contracts and until you get, no kidding, appropriations, and there was just an approps bill passed, it's not real, right? Anybody can put out numbers and he can put out aspirations, but until it is contracted, it's just not real. And having said that, going to 2000 and more beyond 2030, the demand is certainly there, and I think it's entirely justified, and not just for the United States, for the U.S. Army, and to a lesser extent the U.S. Navy for MSE. We got all kinds of allies and partners who are lined up around the block to get this stuff. And on the approps bill, this is interesting. Lots of good talk, and to be sure, there was I think $8.4 billion increase for these things in the approps that was just passed, but it was not enough, and it was not enough by about $20 billion delta, and it was in the committee's report. I guess the request came over a little late, but there's a lot of those prioritized munitions that have been identified in various reports in the journal and other places that are not funded in 2026 to the extent that they should be. And interestingly enough, so far it does not appear that the reconciliation money is being put to this. The reconciliation bill, one big beautiful bill from last year. So we've got a lot to do. The department's got a lot to do to actually put stuff on contract. And I'll just say, Secretary Hegseth, I think it was the National Defense University speech that he gave a couple months ago, kind of talking about these new approaches to defense acquisition. I have to quibble a little bit. He was holding up Golden Dome as an example of moving out, and he said this on multiple occasions, on a wartime footing. To which I say, I think we're going to get there, but next week, one week from I guess yesterday, is going to be the 1-year anniversary of the Iron Dome for America executive order. We're not quite on a wartime footing for this just yet. World War II was only 4 years for us, and so we're 1 year into that window. So I think we've got a lot to do. But for us to even just instantiate and execute and implement what was announced in that PAC-3 MSE announcement, there's going to need to be either a supplemental or reconciliation bill 2.0. And by the way, the margins in the House are very, very, very small. And so I think a reconciliation bill might be even harder this time around than the first.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The rubber meets the road on implementation when you have an obligation of funds, money put on contract, and then the contractor delivering. And then as much as Congress, I think, is in a bipartisan manner aligned with this need to produce more at scale, at speed, I was always reminded working for authorizers, the appropriators matter a lot here. And so I do think that the department has to working not just with the authorizers, but the appropriators as well, to get that increase in funding, the flexibility that they need to obligate those dollars.
I'll just say that there was 1.45 billion for PAC-3 MSE in the appropriations bill, but back of the napkin calculation, if you're between $4 to $4.5 million a round, you're talking between 322 and 362 rounds. Well, that's like half a year from what we're doing right now.
That's a far cry from what the 6,000 that they were hoping to ramp up to, right?
Let's talk a little bit about the tour, the Arsenals of Freedom tour itself, and we can see one picture from behind us. And so, Carrie, I want to ask you, what for you have been some of the highlights so far? Any surprises? Just to kind of pull in a few things that you both have already mentioned that I think are important to tease out that make this a bit unique. And Tom, you talked about how these are big asks that are being made. They are not small. Carrie, you also talked about how there are big names behind this and that's something that sets this apart and that this is a new process. So can you say a bit about the tour, how you see it fitting into bigger conversations about acquisition reform, and what are some of the highlights for you thus far?
Yeah, and I think we have a graphic here queued up as well, just showing those different stops, and even that background picture, that's Rocket Lab in Long Beach, California, a space launch company that's also doing a variety of other things, including developing propulsion systems and other areas. Interestingly, it started out as a New Zealand company. It was formed in New Zealand, but has since moved its headquarters to the United States. But, as I look at these 4 stops, I don't know the decision-making behind why those 4 companies were chosen. But, if I just look there, it's a mix of startups and primes, or so traditionals and non-traditionals. It crosses domains, sea, air, space. In all 4 of these instances, though, there is very much a focus on production scale and speed, which is exactly what the department is messaging. And then, in a place like Rocket Lab or, SpaceX, these are innovators that are delivering at scale as well. For me, it's also a reminder that these are key areas where we need to maintain our warfighting and our technology advantage. If I think of scenarios in the Indo-Pacific, we have an advantage right now in the undersea area. So shipbuilding, submarine building, that is vital to maintaining that warfighting advantage. Space is another area we absolutely have to maintain an advantage there so that we can stay connected across a vast distance of the Indo-Pacific. So key areas there to maintain warfighting advantage. And I think it's also a reminder that the capabilities that are in defense industrial base builds enables our forces to do awesome, complex things and return home safely. So Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela. Secretary Hegseth mentioned B-2s and Operation Midnight Hammer in Iran on one of his stops. I mean, that's leveraging space effects, cyber effects, stealth, just amazing aerial platforms, cruise missiles, the whole gamut of capability that this industrial base, traditional and non-traditional, does very well and needs to deliver, but his messaging at speed and at scale. The other thing I'd say, and I'll emphasize it again, is the fact that it's the secretary himself making the time to do these stops, talk to companies, engage the workforce, the folks on the lines, I think speaks volumes. And it was interesting that each of these stops were paired with announcements. So, Tom, you mentioned the Lockheed Martin Patriot, the PAC-3 MSE missile increase. But then that was paired soon after with, so that's maybe a carrot. Yes, companies, we have these long-term contracts that we're looking to bring you on for multi-year block buy approaches. But oh, by the way, we're also issuing this executive order out of the White House that's a bit of a stick that, if you underperform, although they don't define what underperform means, if you underperform contractors, we're going to figure out ways to work into the contract, ways for you to not buy back stocks, dividends, affect your executive compensation. We'll see how that actually works out. But the idea there was, hey, if you have capital, don't give it to your execs. Put it into investing in your production facilities. So there were carrots and sticks that were announced in tandem to each of these stops.
I want to come back to something you said, Carrie, and just zoom out again a little bit when you talked about the importance of maintaining a warfighting and a technological advantage, because America's adversaries have not remained stagnant throughout all of this. And so to stay ahead and to keep that advantage does require constant innovation. And just to use an example from the nuclear space, I mean, we haven't built an ICBM since the 80s. The newest Minuteman III went into the ground in, I believe it was 72. And we faced a lot of challenges with our ICBM program, copper wiring, having to dig new holes for the silos. I mean, that's just one niche example. But then if you look at what Russia and China are doing, like they aren't just catching up. It does appear like they aren't necessarily interested in parity. They are trying to gain some sort of an advantage in the strategic forces space.
So let me flip that then to you. How do you think Russia and China are interpreting this tour?
I mean, it comes back to implementation. I think because you can say, you can point to, look at all of the hype that this is getting. As you said, Carrie, this is getting cabinet level attention, and it is being synced across the department, the White House, and Congress. So that's sending a really strong message. Until you see implementation and real money and real progress being made here, I would be a little bit, kind of holding back before getting too nervous. But the thing is, I think Russia and China have already committed to their own modernization, at least in strategic forces programs, that to some extent, I don't see this as pushing them one way or the other. At China's military parade last fall, which we did an episode on, they displayed a full triad for the first time. They showed 5 new strategic platforms that have intercontinental range. Russia, just a few weeks ago, used its new-ish Oreshnik missile in Ukraine, which is called a hypersonic. Whether or not it's hypersonic, we can certainly talk about. But I think that the way that Russia and China have built up their strategic forces, it isn't just trying to gain a technological advantage, but it also gives them more political signaling tools. So in Ukraine, when Russia uses the Oreshnik, that's clearly intended to send a message. And so the more tools that you have in the toolkit, there is a political benefit that I think comes with that. And I mean, the Russians never really shut down their production lines. They still have hot production lines that can churn out a lot of dual capable systems, and China seems to be doing the same. Whereas we, with the end of the Cold War, with the New START treaty, which has
how many days left?
Not many. It's a good question. I think 15 days left, or slightly thereabouts. But with that, it seems like we kind of took our foot off the gas pedal. And so I would read this as, we're putting the foot on the gas pedal. Whether or not we go anywhere remains to be seen. Do you think that's a fair interpretation?
Yeah, I'll just say, first of all, I'm not going to dignify the Oreshnik with the hypersonic
I thought
label.
so.
But sustained and controlled flight in the hypersonic regime, and it's basically just a big IRBM. But Putin does like that hyperbole. I'll just say a couple things that jump out here for the Russia-China thing, back to, I think, to your your cautious note, which is ships. I was glad to see that the Newport News was right there at the beginning. The shipyard, they're eating our lunch on shipbuilding. Everybody knows that. It was good to see, for instance, the report that we're going to find ways to go around this by, for instance, purchasing some icebreakers from some of our friends who know how to build icebreakers. Carrie, 15 years ago on the Hill, when we were working at the other Hill, I remember icebreakers being a thing there, and we were studying it earnestly, and we're still waiting for some of those. So I'm glad to see that, but we're going to have to probably buy some of these ships. And yes, there's the whole Golden Fleet initiative. Some of our colleagues, there's some dueling positions here within CSIS about whether the Golden Fleet will ever sail. I guess my good news story there is, look, it's at least getting some attention. Whether there'll be the USS Defiant, which is the coolest name for a ship in a long time, whether there will be a Defiant battleship, we'll see. But we certainly need more attention on that. And I'll just say also, the administration's kind of helping to shepherd the Hanwha Philly shipyard, for instance. That's also good news. But also on the Russia side, what comes to mind there is they are pumping out Shahed-like capabilities, like sausages, with facilities within Russia. Maybe the Ukrainians will find a way to target some more of those.
Speaking of Russia and competition in Europe, let's talk about Greenland. It feels like we have to cover it because Trump did make a reference to Golden Dome in his recent speech at Davos. And so, Tom, I kind of wanted to put that to you. What are you thinking in terms of how Greenland matters for national security, and just your reaction to the president's comment about Golden Dome?
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, you're separate from Golden Dome. If Alaska is the most strategic place in the world, Greenland has to be close. And there's a reason we have this 1951 treaty with Denmark for our ability to have lots of bases there. There's a reason we have Thule base up there.
Pacific.
Yes, indeed. But those things to a large extent were tailored to the old legacy Soviet ICBMs coming over the pole. And that's still a problem, but there's a whole mess of other things that we got to worry about now. So I think there's a lot of value and there's a lot of utility to dramatically increasing our military footprint, not just for watching ICBMs as they go past, but counter-air, frankly, counter-ship, lots of maritime surveillance. Our Canadian friends, as part of the combined Golden Dome initiative, it's now under that umbrella, they're putting some OTHRs, over-the-horizon radars, so they can peer into Russia and kind of watch the bombers move around, look for cruise missiles, things like that. So it's part of what I like to call a 21st century DEW line or 21st century north warning system. We need a lot more sensors up there, and not just about ballistic missile defense or ICBM defense. Fort Greely, Alaska happens to be the location for a pilot project of counter UAS, so that we can defend our ICBM killers from these more garden variety aerial threats, for instance. So I know that the Greenland thing is getting a lot of noise. I think there's a lot of utility, and it sounds like from the news today that the ice may be breaking or thawing on this issue a bit. And so I'm cautious. I know, dad jokes. I'm cautiously optimistic. I can do this all day on that front.
One last question because we are getting a lot of questions
So I
coming
can't
in.
say that I've been to the top of the world bar.
Okay, yes, tell us the story.
No, I can't. But I have. I've had a chance to go visit Pacific. Now Pacific, Space Force Base, formerly Thule. Visited the top of the world bar there. But Tom's absolutely right. I mean, there's such utility, and it is such a strategic location for us, really for the NATO alliance as well. In early warning for missile defense, space situational awareness or space surveillance. We use those radars for that. Tom mentioned Arctic security port surveillance. As the ice continues to thaw, more activity is happening in the maritime domain up there. And our access and presence absolutely matters, in addition to the benefits there of the minerals that they have. And our colleague Graceland Baskerville has written on this as well.
But yeah, before we go to questions coming in, I wanted to do a little insider baseball, I guess, more so than usual, and ask, what are you all hearing from industry? about the Arsenals of Freedom tour, the acquisition process. Tom, you already kind of started to answer this and saying there still seem to be a lot of questions about what will replace JCIDS. And also, I didn't know what JCIDS stood for either. It's Joint Capabilities Integration and Development Systems.
We were close.
So we were all close, but none of us were right. Let's, just to put out there some things that I'm hearing, and I think you both will have really good insights. What I hear a lot from industry is this sounds really promising, but we really don't like unpredictability. And it's the constant fluctuations and also kind of the suddenness with which some policy changes happen. The one thing I am hearing in particular seems to be that they're really not sure about the future of U.S. alliances, which could have really big implications for a lot of industry in terms of foreign military sales, U.S. basing, obviously, but also where they have some of their production facilities. And so while, in principle, this seems really promising for industry, in practice, there still seems to be some questions and uneasiness about unpredictability. Does that gel with what you both are hearing from industry?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll just say, first of all, on the allies piece, it was our Danish friends that just in the past, I think 6 or 8 weeks, it's been billions of dollars of U.S. weapon sales that have been approved for Denmark, IBCS, AMRAAM, a bunch of other stuff. So I think they get some credit for that, and I hope we can proceed with those sales in all due haste. But yeah, I think nothing focuses the mind quite like a gallows or a signed contract. And again, it's kind of what I said before. Press releases are good, speeches are good. Mm-hmm. But get the contracts out there and get the appropriations out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were 3 areas where I received feedback. One was just general optimism that the teams that have engaged, what the department's working on in this area, they're serious. These are thoughtful conversations happening, publicly, but also happening privately with each of these companies. That this team is serious about production scaling and breaking down barriers to make that happen. Second, it's implementation, is they need to see implementation. We keep talking about demand signaling, that the best way that the department can send a demand signal is to put money on contract, multi-year block buys. That gives that predictability for companies to then invest in the infrastructure that they need to scale. So demand signaling contracts, budget stability, but then also is Congress going to follow suit? So Tom already mentioned the role of the appropriators. And then thirdly, we haven't talked AI at all, but I thought that was very interesting. At the Secretary's stop at SpaceX down in Texas, he unveiled an AI strategy there. And I think this team, very savvy folks many folks that are savvy coming out of that world, we're going to see much more, we're going to see more forward leaning when it comes to AI, embracing it, integrating it in missions and workflows, finally moving beyond innovation theater. I think they'd like to take some smart risks. We'll have to figure out what that looks like. And the minute you take a risk and you fail, that you're not you're not bludgeoned over it, but that we're able to move on. They're willing to tackle bureaucratic processes and barriers. And just in the area of AI, and I'm going to channel the time when I was in the building, and there was a phenomenal team working this AI pathfinder called Project Maven, bringing AI to classifying objects in full motion video. I remember the team, just to be able to get access to other people's data, literally had a file, like a paper file, and had to go knocking door to door around the E-ring to get other offices to allow them to access the data. Things like that just take time and are stupid. Like that, I think this team's, I hope, they're going to cut through some of that red tape.
Well, they announced that Grok is going to be in the Pentagon database to go search for this stuff.
Oh, there you go.
Right?
There you go. So I think AI, we're moving beyond science experiment, and I think we'll see some meaningful integration of that capability into department missions.
So we have questions coming in. I'm going to give one to each of you. Tom, the first one for you. This is definitely for you. If the demand signal for increased THAAD and THAAD SM-3 production is provided with additional reconciliation or a supplemental funding bill, what are the other bottlenecks that we can anticipate that might limit production and need to be considered? And for Carrie, this is a really big question, but what would be a realist lens to defense acquisition reform and thinking about the industrial base? You want to go first, Tom?
Yeah, so bottlenecks and I'll broaden it a little bit to be SRMs, solid rocket motors, and missile defense munitions. A little bit more broadly, this is the topic always on my mind. the bottlenecks, first of all, contracts. And we've seen some high-level attention to this. We now have one contract moving towards signing. We've got a number. I'll pull up briefly a graphic from the Wall Street Journal that it's just sort of depicted about half of the 12 or so prioritized munitions that are both offensive and defensive. It was, THAAD, PAC-3, JASM, LRASM, and this kind of stuff. So be looking in the coming weeks for these things to be, weeks and months to be in the news. Beyond that, yes, there are some long lead items. For instance, to be sure, focal plane arrays, seekers, certainly for PAC-3, the seeker for the PAC-3 is and has been a bottleneck for ourselves and for the Japanese that co-produce it and are anxious to produce more of it. The good news there is the head of Boeing Defense in December, I think it was, pledged to be producing 2250 per year of seekers. So that's a good goal. Again, that needs to get on contract for that to be real, but that's a good thing to see.
So contracts and seeker as the biggest potential bottlenecks.
And SRMs, and what can we do to get around that? To some extent, it's second source. You could have second source for a number of these things. The department has kind of been exploring that with these startup solid rocket motor facilities. But I will say I've made the analogy to a receiver. We've kind of been playing with the bass and the treble, and what we really need to do is just crank up the volume button. And there's really two companies that are capable of that. And the department this week, announced, for instance, a $1 billion equity stake in what is now called Missile Solutions. It was the artist formerly known as Aerojet, purchased by L3Harris. They and Northrop Orbital HTK are really the two big producers, and there's a lot of other up-and-comers. So turning up the volume dial, and that's really the thing that is needful. And I'll just say the other piece of this, and what is very interesting about DepSec Feinberg's approach, by putting the onus on industry, which has been, by the way, done with a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth and angst because these are publicly traded companies and they have a fiduciary responsibility. It's kind of a move to what extent, and not completely, but to what extent can we move towards the commodification of munitions? And to what extent can we encourage, and this is going to require good behavior and responsible behavior on the part of the customer, most of all, what extent can we encourage industry to go out ahead of need and ahead of contract? That's a big risk. Whenever the government changes its mind and goes up and down like a sine wave in terms of munitions production. So those are some developments, those are some possible directions that would help the bottleneck question.
Carrie, be a realist.
Okay, realist. So when I was at the Pentagon, I was given great advice by my predecessor. You're going to be pulled every different way. Things are going to happen. There's maybe some world event that's going to draw your attention away. So when you get into the job, pick those three things, those three big rocks that you're going to be dogged about, and just keep focused on those. Those are your priorities. So the realist in me says you've got the leaders that I hope are going to be dogged about acquisition reform, where they can make. They're big initiatives on the plate, on the table, but I think where they can make some real, meaningful, lasting progress are in the non-sexy areas that nobody likes to work on, because you got to get your hands dirty, but they're so critical. So things like contracts. If you're awarded a contract, it shouldn't take 11 months to actually get the company on contract. Speed that up. Clearances, if clearances or SCIF access is an impediment, that is imminently fixable. It just takes somebody to put that as a big rock on their plate. Things like test and evaluation, that's an area where we can speed that up, giving these companies with these new systems, with prototypes, access to ranges, working through a much faster operational acceptance process. Like, those are things that are concrete things to do. Regulatory reforms, where something to watch for here is the DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations. They're opening that up to modification reform. Fix some of those basic. There's a lot of regs. Fix those. FMS reforms, foreign material sales reforms. If you don't want the Department of War footing the bill for all of these systems, and you want to amortize costs, make it a lot easier to sell and deliver these capabilities, whether it be satellite data, munitions, missiles, et cetera, to our allies and partners, and don't get stuck in these 3 to 5 year FMS cycles. And then just lastly, maybe, is a real benchmark here, I think, of these reforms. It will be a culture change, and that's so hard to quantify. But how individuals think about risk taking, how they're empowered to make decisions, how things actually get to the focus on fielding, like seeing that culture change and seeing those kind of things inculcated. I think that'll probably be the real measure here.
Two really quick follow-ups in terms of the contract. For instance, another development on the defense acquisition reform side is the kind of restructuring and consolidation from PEOs, program executive offices, into the program acquisition executives. And so, for instance, the U.S. Army's kind of moved out on this especially quickly. And so you see, for instance, the PAE fires being consolidated into this pretty big organization that has all kinds of offensive and defensive missiles, the PAs. And then the second thing is on the foreign sales, allow companies to do more DCS, direct commercial sales, to you reduce that unit cost and kind of encourage everybody, hey, we're going to let you sell. We want you to make profit enough to stay in business and to be able to sell these things to us, the Pentagon, in the future.
And on the PAE point, the program acquisition executives, if all we're doing is window dressing and deleting, today you're PEO, a program executive officer, and tomorrow you're a PAE, a program acquisition executive, like that doesn't generate change. So what are we going to do differently? What authorities and that ability to do those trades, the contract budget, the performance, the schedule trades, really empowering them to do that. Like that'll be a measure of if implementation is happening.
Last question for all three of us, I think, which is if you could add a stop to the tour, what would you add? I'll kick this one off just to get us started. So I would add Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Of course, I'm going to pick a nuclear spot, but with really
You're going to get an email from Los Alamos now.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, guys. Any of the national labs, but no, I genuinely would suggest going to Livermore. It now has the fastest computer in the entire world. It has the National Ignition Facility, which has now achieved ignition, which is incredible scientific feat. But also, I think Livermore is somewhere that really embodies a component of industrial base and acquisition reform that we haven't touched on a ton, which is the workforce. That Livermore just has an incredible workforce. It helps being close to Silicon Valley, I suspect. But at least in the nuclear space, the workforce challenges, they are really real. The number of students getting bachelor's degrees in nuclear engineering have gone down by 25% from 2012 to 2022. About 17% of the nuclear expert workforce is over the age of 55. And so all of that knowledge, both like subject matter expertise, tacit knowledge, on the verge of being lost. And I think Livermore, for me, is somewhere that's really shown a lot of reflection, lessons learned, and implementing their own lessons learned to make those changes. But the last one, to really make the case for any of the national labs, to be honest, it is the need for culture change. The labs, Carrie, you were saying a lot about the need for culture change and getting past some of this risk aversion. Don't get me wrong, with nuclear weapons, you want to be risk conscious, to be clear. But at the same time, there comes a point where your risk calculus can actually inhibit innovation. And the labs are starting to make some really exciting strides in that direction. But so just showing up to highlight their importance and their contributions and to keep encouraging that spirit of innovation, I think would go a long way. Carrie, where would you pick?
So I have two, and team, call me if you want help in this. The first one is the the first one is the suppliers and the mom and pop shops. So the 4 stops that the secretary made were all fairly large companies that are building entire systems to deliver. They are the tip of a pyramid of subcontractor, sub, second, third tier, fifth tier, down to the mom and pop level. And those companies have to scale as well if we're really going to be successful scaling these end unit missiles and weapon systems. And then the second one is, I'd love to see an international stop. I've been able to travel to and engage with so many of our allies and partners, whether it be in Europe, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. They want to be a part. They, in many cases, they recognize they may not be building the whole up weapon system. They may buy from us, but they are very good at the component level, and they want to be part of our trusted supply chain. So how do we bring them in to that ecosystem, and then frankly signal that our allies and partners matter and are part of this solution for us? And that also sends a pretty good signal to Russia and China as well.
Yeah. Well, my mind first went to Huntsville, Alabama, but actually the Secretary was already in Huntsville, and so he's already done that. I really like the second tier, third tier component providers. But no, I'm going to say Camden, Arkansas. And Camden, Arkansas is where we produce lots and lots of rockets. We kind of keep them for explosive safety reasons. We keep them away from other things, so it's a little hard to get to Camden. But we're building, solid rocket motors there by a number of companies. So it's including, by the way, partnering with our Israeli friends for the Tamir Iron Dome type interceptor. So that would be a good trip. And then I would say Dan Sullivan would also be happy if he went up to Fort Greely, for instance. So.
I'm not sure everyone wants to go up to Alaska, but that's okay. Could be fun.
You get more points though when you go in the winter.
That's true.
November,
That's
December,
true.
January.
Going in August, no good.
Yeah, that's a great incentive. I'm sure the Secretary needs points to go there. No, this was a really great conversation. With that, we're going to bring things to a close. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks to the Pony, MDP, ASP, and streaming and broadcasting teams for making this event possible. Please do keep your radars tuned to this channel so you don't miss future HTK discussions on strategic forces. And that's all, and thanks again for joining.